People often ask me how they can get more life and energy into their pastel work. And I'm going to show you today how you can do this by varying the marks that you make as you put the pastel on the surface, but also how to keep that surface fresh and vibrant. First of all, I'm starting off on a piece of mount card that I've painted with Art Spectrum Pastel Primer, and I've used two colours which I've mixed together, Raw Sienna and Sand Colour, and I've just painted it on very roughly with a 1-inch decorator's brush, and it gives me a lovely textured surface, but I've sanded it down slightly because I'm going to be working quite small today and I don't want too much texture. And what I do is I break my pastel in half or into a workable size, and I take the label off so that I've got lots of flexibility with the way I use it. So let's have a look at the different marks we can make and how we can contrast those marks to get a really interesting painting on the go. So first of all, I'm going to use the pastel on its side, and I'm going to make broad, energetic strokes to really get some energy into my painting. Now this works great if you want to show movement, put on a vigorous background for skies where you want to have a sort of windy day. Great for getting some energy into your work, which will always be there when you work into it. And we can also use the pastel on its long edge. So you can make linear marks with it, which could be straight marks, or you can twist those marks around, and by varying the weight and how much of the pastel you have on the surface, you can get some real life and vigour into those twisting lines. Okay, so that's using the pastel on its edge. You can also use the pastel on its on the very end, and if you wanted to, you can break it to get a really sharp edge. Or you can use it almost like a pencil and hatch lots of colours together. This is a great way to get lots of colours, tones, blending it all together without having to actually smudge it. And it works beautifully if you're going to do skin tones on portraits or for the changing hues in landscapes. But of course there's also smudging, which lots of people always want to do with their pastels. But what you have to be aware of when you actually smudge the pastel with your hand is that you're going to lose some of that intensity of colour that you get there. So it's great for softening areas, being very gentle, but I think it's important not to smudge your whole picture, otherwise you're going to lose some of the life you've already got. So if we've got lots of different ways of putting the marks on, we then want to make sure that we keep that surface really fresh and clear. And you can build these marks up into as many layers as you want to. But what we don't want to get is that muddy build-up on the surface, because when you've got that, you can't then get a really good clear mark of a lighter colour for, say, a contrast or a highlight. If you scratch off that excess pigment with a nice flat blade, you've then got a surface that you've refreshed, that you can make much brighter marks over it. And by being able to scratch off the excess pigment on the surface, you can then work as many techniques as you want to over each other, or if you wanted to get rid of the pastel altogether, you then have the ability to rub it out. So there's lots of different ways to put the pastel on, and let's have a look at how you can bring them all together in a painting. So here we have a painting that I've started. I'm past halfway through it, but what you can see is where I've put some broad, energetic marks on for the sky, but I've been much more linear working into the sea because I want to get the feeling that it's a horizontal surface. But then I've been wiggling my lines around, getting a little bit of movement into it to get the feeling of the wind blowing in his hair and some movement lines around him. But I've done quite a lot of soft smudging on his face, and I've also hatched into it a little bit. very gently, but with Conte crayons and pastel pencils, just because it's quite a small picture, and I just want to keep the softness and the subtlety of his skin and his face, but contrast that with a bit more energy, because he's on the beach, it's a windy day, and I want to get some of that feeling into it. So even though I'm working from a photograph, I want to try and put a lot more energy into my painting than is in the photograph. So I've got 3 unison yellows here to start with, and I'm just going to put a sort of basic yellow on to start with onto his t-shirt, and I'm putting quite sort of broad marks on to kind of block it in, but I'm also trying to leave some of the colour of that surface showing through, because it's quite a good shadow colour. And as I'm blocking in this colour, I'm also twisting my pastel as I put it on, just to get a feeling of that fabric and the flow of it as it comes around the form of his body, but also as it's blowing about in the wind a bit. So that was the first yellow. And now I'm picking up a much richer one. I didn't use this one to start with because, having softened the rest of the picture, I didn't want this to be just too bright. So I'm putting that on with that kind of twisting motion. It's not really a shadow, it's just where the sun's catching it and you're getting those lovely the warmth of the brightness of the sunlight on the yellow. And I'm just kind of softly smudging it in places because I know I'm going to go over it. I'm just going to scratch it back a bit with the, you can see how much of that pigment's coming off the surface because I want to work over it. I'm also going to put a little bit of that yellow around him, and I'm going to put some of it, just tweak a little bit of it here and there to get a little bit more life in the rest of the picture, because I don't want this just kind of sudden brightness there. So I'm just going to put some little flicks around his head and in this bit of the sand where it's coming towards us. Okay, now I'm going to go for my I'm picking up a Conte crayon because I want a little bit more detail. And I'm looking at the folds now, and I'm really looking at twisting my pastel around to get some interesting marks. And remember, there's the folds of it going around his body, but there's also that feeling that the wind's tugging at it. So I just want to get a little bit of that feeling in, a little bit more into the background as well. And then I'm going to scratch that back and get a nice lighter one as a kind of highlight where the sunlight's really catching him. Okay, so I've got my lightness on there, and now I'm just going to work a little bit into the background with a little bit of the sand colour again under here, and to really bring out the yellow I'm just going to put a little bit of lilac behind it to shoot it out, and a little bit of the blue that is in his shorts to just anchor it down so that it's all actually related. So there we have it, some nice vigorous marks to get some life and energy into it. But if you were just going to be copying faithfully from the photograph, I don't think you get as much life and movement as by using lots of different pastel marks. And we know, because we can always change it, that we just don't have the stress of worrying that we're spoiling it all the time. And here we can see the finished picture with just a little bit more detail put in.